If you attended the assembly 2 years ago, you will recall that this presentation was not part of the normal assembly. What the director did was not reported during the annual meeting. Let me first explain why we decided to include this as part of the program of the assembly. It turns out that in different conversations with different members of the community in the past, we realized that there was no clear knowledge as to what the board does. And there was a lot of lack of information regarding the roles of the board of directors. Many people came up to us and asked if we could assist them, for example, in assigning IPs because they were in a waiting list. Others came up to us asking us if we didn't take steps to implement more fiber optics in the Latin American and Caribbean region. So those are the types of things that have nothing to do with the role of LACNIC's board of directors. So what we thought was, why don't we explain more of what we do and use the assembly for this purpose? That is why there is meta-knowledge on the role of the board and the activities we carried out. A further option is that different people wish to collaborate more in the community and think that the board is the adequate place to do so, and that what they wish to do is in fact more aligned with other spaces of the community and maybe not precisely the board, because the board of directors does things that are different from what you wish to achieve. So we want to be certain that you are all aware of the activities we carried out, and if someone wishes to provide further support and you see that this coincides with the way you wish to collaborate with the community and what the board does, then you can commit yourself when you are nominated. And otherwise, which are the positions in the community that are more aligned with your personal objectives as a community and the organization? So in this presentation, let us explain the composition of the board first. Then we'll look at the work we do as a board, the operations and characteristics, the work we did in 2022, what are the documents and guidelines we worked on and implemented last year, what were the most relevant resolutions, as well as other aspects in which the board of directors was involved last year. Let me start then telling you about the composition of LACNIC's board this year. Can we have the next slide, please?
Muy bien.
So the LACNIC's board of directors is composed of 7 members, and we come from different countries. Some of you know all the directors, but others not so much. So it's a good opportunity to introduce them. Let's start from right to left. We have Javier Salazar from Mexico. He was a member of the board for many years, and his term ends in 2025. He's also part of the Committee of Risk and Information Security of the board. We have Carmen Denis, who is vocal from Mexico. She joined the board a few years ago and also collaborates with the Risks Committee and Information Security. She is also the second secretary of the board. We have Esteban Lescano from Argentina. He currently is the secretary of the board of directors, and his term ends in 2024. We have Wartner Maya, who is not with us today because he is sick and recovering at home. He's a deputy treasurer from Brazil. His term ends in December 2025. We have Gabriel Adornailo from Argentina, who is the treasurer, and he's also a member of the Finance Committee together with Wartner Maya. We have Evandro Varonil, who is a deputy secretary and is also part of the Information Security and Risk Committee, and myself from Colombia. I'm the president, and my term ends next year, and I've been a member of the board for quite a number of mandates. So these are the members of the board, in addition to Oscar Robles, who is the executive director, and he participates in the board meetings with a vote, but with not a vote. So Oscar, together with other members of the staff, participate in the meetings we have. Now, let us explain the role of the board. I would like to start with something, namely stating that the directors are here to ensure that the organization meets the objectives with which it's created. The social objective has 7 important points that we have to comply with. As directors, we are forced, or we are committed rather, to see that these 7 points of the social objective are met. If we don't ensure that these 7 points are met, then we would not be complying with our role. We have to ensure that these objectives are met, and at the same time that the organization that supports these points is an efficient organization that does adequate use of the resources, and that this is sustainable over time. So that would be a good summary of the purpose of the board. The board of directors, or the authority of the board of directors, is given to it by the members, because ultimately they are the ones who choose the members of the boards, who are constantly thinking how we can ensure that we meet the social objective of the organization. Now, to meet the social objective, which include managing IPs, to represent the standpoints of the interest from the region, to provide IP address registry services, and to collaborate in the growth of internet in the region, and promote educational and technical opportunities, as well as the development of policies like the forum we had a while ago. All these are roles that the board of directors has. Now, to meet all these roles, we have actions that have different terms. There are long-term actions, for example, all those that have to do with the strategic plan. The strategic plan is created for a 3 to 5 year period. So this is a vision of what we wish to achieve over a relatively longer period of time. So not only to have a view of the present, but what the organization is today and what it should be in the coming years. So that is the strategic plan. It's the long-term action. Then we have the medium-term actions that have to do with things such as the review and annual approval of the budget, of the operational plan, and the regulations. We call these medium-term actions because normally these are for a 1-year period. For example, some modifications of documents take a bit longer and not done on such a regular basis. But this has to do with the role we have as a board of directors. And then we have the short-term actions when we constantly see how the plan is being implemented, how the budget is being implemented. This is the operational plan. We are not, we don't design it, but we monitor if that is carried out, and if it is carried out during the year and is finally approved. And sometimes we have requests or options that things have to be improved. For example, when the war broke out in Russia, this had an impact on the stock exchange throughout the world, and some LACNIC's reserves were invested, financial investors. So we see how we can protect the investments we made. When the pandemic came, we then considered how we would be responding to the requirements of the payroll and what we're going to do with the General Assembly, because we couldn't meet during the pandemic. So these decisions had to be made. And what about the legal advice? So whenever there are unexpected situations, we meet to find solutions based ourselves on the guidelines of the organization, on the legal requirements, and also with the support of experts. Now, considering long-term issues, why is it so important to review the long-term situations? Because this is not a static organization and it changes over time. This is an organization that is more than 20 years old, so we are no longer in the initial stages of growth. What was important 10 years ago might not be so important today, or maybe things that were important and that had to be achieved have already been achieved, and now we have to maintain these things. That is why plans have to change, and also in accordance with the reality. 10 years ago, we had IPv4 addresses to assign. Now, income came and members came just to ask us for resources, but now the situation might be different compared to what we had a few years ago. That is why we have to review what we have to do for that year and for the coming years so that the organization continues meeting its social objectives and to maintain the standards we have or even exceeding these. Right now we are at a stage of operational excellence, and we sometimes find it even difficult to see what we can improve yet further. For example, about the personnel. So we look at the past years. How many years have you been at the best place to work regarding employee satisfaction? It's very difficult to even go beyond that. Customer satisfaction, we check that every now and again, and that is very high. So everything is at a level of excellence, but maintaining that is sometimes even more difficult than reaching that stage. So now we have to maintain those levels of excellence, and that is part of our objective as a board. So the strategic plan that we now have was defined last year and reaches out until 2025. That is the period for this plan. Now, for this strategic plan, we have several pillars on which all our actions are based. We have a special mission is to build a regional community for a better global internet. And with that aim, we have to meet with all the principles we have. The principles include how we value people, we seek excellence, we work as a team, and we are strongly committed. Like I mentioned earlier, there are many issues related to the institutional life that support this strategy. So the operational plans we implement have to be aligned with the strategic plan, the long-term strategic plan. Then we have, this slide is a bit busy, but basically we have the strategic plan and the definition of the guidelines for the government. These define the limits within which we can move the objectives. We have strategic processes within the organization, and everything we do in the organization is aligned with the strategic guidelines. This is there to support the different services we offer. We also have the support. As a board, we don't get involved in the implementation of all these things, but we focus on having the necessary guidelines in order to meet all these objectives. Now, how do we communicate in the board? We have a mailing list with which we constantly communicate. We have telephone calls. Every year we have about 7 meetings. These last about 2 hours, and very often this takes more than 2 hours because there are many things that we have to discuss. And then we have in-person meetings. We have 4 in-person meetings every year, which have a duration of 1 to 3 days. And how can you meet together for 1 to 3 days in the same room? But we really discuss very many topics, and many decisions have to be made.
For instance, at this meeting, it took the entire Sunday and then the morning of Monday just for the board meeting. And sometimes we meet for 2 or 3 days, and at the end of the year to check everything that was done that year and to go through everything that will be done next year. That takes time. And we also take part of internal committees. There are some discussions that don't require the entire board to be there, sometimes drafting documents. So implying the entire board will imply even longer. And so we have several committees, and each committee will be in charge of a topic, and usually there are from 2 to 3 directors being part of that committee together with other members of the staff. So we have investment and finances, risk and security of the information, and then we have the members of the board that are part of the years, and sometimes, well, it depends on the year. How do we distribute time? Here we have the key topics for the board. Much of the time has to do with the organization of LACNIC, precisely as an organization. 23% of the time is devoted to that. Checking financial issues, about 18%, and to review operations, 19%. Topics that have to do with the community, 15%, and procedures, community, internal organization, statutes, 11%, and operations. So this is quite difficult, different from what you think we spend our time in, because the technical issues are done by other parts of the community. Policies is analyzed at the meetings to approve it, but it is not part of the time of the board, and things like that. So that gives you an idea of what the board does at its meetings and the topics that we have to make decisions about. So let's talk about what the board does not do. We already saw something in the previous meeting. So we do not define the policy resources. The policies are done by the community through the Public Policy Forum. Today we had the forum and the community could participate. What does the board do? Well, we ratify. And what is that? Basically, when a policy is approved by the community and it reaches LACNIC for implementation, we have a chance to check, and if what was approved goes against LACNIC as an organization, it's impossible to implement or causes damage to the association because of other things that are not appropriate, then the board may reject that policy and send it back to find another solution. It's very strange for that to happen. Or also, we ensure that the policy that we reached to implement met all the steps that are needed. So the idea is, so if a policy was done without complying with the process, then you give an opportunity for the community to participate in its discussion and approval. What else do we do to have the knowledge to ratify a policy? We read the proposals, we follow the policy list, we monitor what is being said, we measure the impact analysis of the staff. Sometimes if we notice something that is not in the impact analysis that is relevant, we can communicate, and we attend a public forum to see what's happening with the process. And we propose initiatives to improve the development of policies, things that may be useful. We don't get engaged in the policy itself, but in the process so that it will be better. Let me give you an example. Some years ago, we were worried to see how can we ensure that there is enough participation for the chairs so that we may guarantee that the chairs may be people with the capacity to direct a policy forum, because that's difficult. So they decided to hold trainings, so to train the people who wanted to be moderators. And thanks to that, we've had very good chairs, as you may have seen. Just to give you an example of things done by the board to support the policy development process. So, who else? What else does the board not do? We do not define the organizations that receive resources of the internet, so we are asked about that. We are not the ones who decide who receives and who doesn't. So there are policies stating who decides, and there are requirements, and the staff applies the policies. So the board has absolutely nothing to do with those decisions. And what we do is that basically we check that the staff is complying with the process, and LACNIC organization also verifies that the regional registries, Mexico and Brazil, we conduct audits so they may comply with the processes, and the board always learns about the audit to the regional boards. We do not conduct financial audits, but we review the quarterly and annual financial statements, and we work with the fiscal committee and the external auditors, looking for improvement possibilities and working with the staff to seek how to implement it. So we are not control entities. Those are the internal auditor, the auditors, and the fiscal committee. They check that everything is financial perfectly well and that the internal procedures are being complied, and they tell us if something is not being done well, and we need to see what's going to do to fix what's not working. Now, for the peace of mind of the members, in recent years, increasingly we find, in the reports we find almost nothing we need to do, because the staff follows it quite adequately. What else does the board not do? We do not adopt the operational decisions in the organization. We establish the general directives, the strategic ones, but not the fine details of for each project. So the staff follows the guidelines, but we do monitor the implementation regularly. Nor do we adopt decisions on technical topics. However, we evaluate the risks of technical operations, for instance, the risk of security of information. And the approach is more executive. The implementation of the technological risk or digital security are of concern. Nor do we work to get funds to deploy networks in the region, because this is not part of the social purpose of the organization. We monitor the promotion programs such as FRIDA, and sometimes the funds are assigned for the deployment of networks, but it's not the key objective of LACNIC to do that. Sometimes FRIDA assigns it when the project has merits, but we don't value investment volumes that need women, so it hasn't to do with the access. We do not handle the monetary resources of the organization. We check the annual budget statement. We see to it that the use of the resources are adequate and efficient, and the finance committee guides the staff in the administration of reserves. So we need to maintain reserves operational in case something happens, and we have guidelines as to how the reserves are being done. What's the optimal level that is established between the board and the finance committee. So after seeing what we do and what we do not do, let me show you some things that we did last year. As to new documents created, one is the policy for the transfer of spending. There were some policy of transfer of spending budget. If a project was decided to be done in June, but then they switched the idea, because then the staff had to wait until the board met to correct that. So that slowed down the so now you can move money within certain limits to give a greater efficiency and speed to the organization. And the agreement of confidentiality of the ethics committee that has worked for some time. The members of the ethics committee need to be from the laboratory, from the board, or people in the community. They had to maintain confidentiality. This document was approved last year, and a very important thing that is in the past we had only had a risk committee, and with every time the security information is more important. So we worked on a policy of security of information for disclosement agreement. One was the commitment of the board of LACNIC, and what happens if one member of the board is non-compliant. So far, we have all done our job. What happens in the future? Somebody new does not meet the standards. There should be mechanisms to replace that member of the board that is not abiding by the commitments. Then we have the agreements, confidentiality agreements and non-disclosure agreements of the commissions, the reserve policy, the risk management policy, the travel of the board policy, committees and members of AC, and the definition and operations of the board committee. What are the guidances that need to be applied for that purpose? What are some of the most important resolutions? Some are repeated, some are new. But for instance, January, that's a month we get together and we decide the positions, and we define who will represent the board in different committees of representation. We also define the calendar for the entire year and the annual electoral timetable, both statutories for the community, because there's a lot of things that you have to do. You have to plan what works well, and it is important, and you have to review it and approve it, and in January that's what we do. In February we approve the objectives of the CEO, and in December we develop the operational plan, and it's approved, and the budget, and by February we define the responsibilities of the executive director for the operational plan and all the rest of the objectives that the director must meet. In March, we call for the extraordinary assembly. This year, we called for the assembly in March, and we read the annual assembly. This one corresponds to 2022. In November, we monitor the recommendations for fiscal controls, and in December, the longest. In December, we spent 3 days in Montevideo reviewing everything that happened the previous year. If the revenues were met, if the spending was done appropriately, what are the risks that really turned out to be and which not. So a lot of things are checked at the end of the year, and we also approve the operation part for next year and the budget for next year. So those are the most important things. Other resolutions, I won't get into the details. I don't want to worry you with so many resources, but there are many documents that we needed to go through, and they were also done in the reviews of the previous year. Here, for instance, we have when a policy is done in the forum and it comes for ratification in the appropriate meeting, we check all the approval and we ratify it. And we debate whether there are any risks for LACNIC implementing some policy, and we return it. We may return the case. And it's happened almost nowhere. In only one case did we give it back, and in another one we didn't approve it after the procedure. And here we have other topics debated at the previous board. There are some that are interesting. It has to do with the reports to NIRs. Well, there are some that are not audited by LACNIC, but by Mexico and Brazil. the other NICs that follow the same rules of the rest of the community. So LACNIC has the responsibility to make sure that they are doing it properly. So that is why we audit them, and especially in the implementation of policy.
Last year, we revised the two national registries. Now we also checking the waiting list. Those who asked for IPv4 resources in the previous months know that there is a waiting list of many years, so we do a constant follow-up on the status to see what we can do in order to improve the situation or to communicate that operators operate IPv6 because it will take longer to obtain IPv4 resources. And then we do follow up to the quality control and the survey of the services. Regarding the quality audit, we check whether we are following the procedures correctly, and the services survey tells us from the members and for the clients, we could say, if from their standpoint we're meeting their expectations. We check what is being met and what not, and after that the staff prepares a plan as to how to respond to those things where they don't do so well, and the board does follow up. The board then, when they have the most important meeting, they communicate these things through the mailing list and through the website. Maybe some of you have not seen these things, but if you wish to look at the reports, we share this transparently in the website and explain what we did during each of the activities, the summary of the activities. So thank you very much. This was the report of the Board of Directors.